The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Second Book. The Letter of BELICENA VILLCA. 58th Day. The Amautas were guarded by 16 warriors who turned, by 8, to charge the letters. To them were added the 6 lords of Tharsis, and the 4 Catalan survivors. The path guider Indian was not allowed to travel and he remained with the Murscas. From the last skirmish, they have saved 8 horses, and the 2 Spaniard deckers, apart from the chicken's cage of Castile, and the entire equipment. They were following the Amautas, through a narrow straight path towards the east, ascending permanently through the eastern mountain range. One day later, after they overnighted in a gelid cavern at 3,500 meters of altitude, they arrived to the peak of a mountain that started as arm of the main chain. All indicated that the descent would start thence, but the immediate event would disprove such presumption. Suddenly, after a bend the path ended abruptly in front of an unpenetrable stone wall. The mountain arose before the caravan, preventing it pass. In such situation, any European would have turned back, searched another way to cross it, surrounding the obstacle. That would be the logical. But it was appreciated that the Amautas of the Black Bonnet, as the lords of Tharsis, were not governed by the principles of the logic. They, without hesitation, went down from their seats, and started the preparations. The men of stone, still amazed for the detention, observed the mountainous wall closely, and then, almost simultaneously, understood what was happening. They were in presence of an entrance sealed by the runes of Neptune, similar to the entrance of the secret cavern of the Condelaria Hill, in the far Huelva. Now, the runes were clearly visible for them, and they could cross the wall in an instant, just approaching strategically to the hidden aperture. But they were aware that only the initiates are capable to effectuate such operation. In the house of Tharsis, only a few thousand of descendants had obtained to do it, and for this reason they were considered nobles or vrayers. So, what would they do? They would abandon the 4 Catalans? And, the most intriguing, how would pass those rude warriors, who were clearly not initiates? The answers would not delay to come. One of the Amautas took a recipient of purunca, and, uncovering it, he proceeded to give a drink to each one of the warriors of his guard. Minutes later the potion made effect, and the Indians were like hypnotized, looking without batting an eye, but conserving the equilibrium. Evidently, the drug has deprived them momentarily of consciousness, because the Amautas were taking them from the shoulders, and were pushing them to the rocks of the mountain, and they were immediately guided. But the most amazing for the lords of Tharsis was to see how the Amautas introduced the warrior in the secret entrance, and disappeared in the interior of the enormous rocks, to return immediately for the others. "Gods!" exclaimed Leto of Tharsis. "If our house would have possessed the formula of that substance!" Finally, only the Spaniards remained on that side of the mountain, and the Amautas offered the purunca, making signals to the lords of Tharsis to make them drink. The 6 men of stone desisted to consume the drug, but they forced the skeptics Catalans to do it. Each one of them sipped a little, and experienced, minutes later, a fulminant effect. They fell on the floor profoundly asleep. Thereupon they dragged them to secret entrance, but inexplicably now was possible to introduce them therein. Such secret entrance not guided, as in Huelva, to a cavern, but a tunnel of some 100 meters of longitude, in which extreme appeared a new motive of surprise for the lords of Tharsis. In fact, at the exit of the tunnel, they found themselves in the middle of a stone carriageway with walls at each side, and perfectly aligned from north to south, which was lost in the distance towards both cardinal points. Over the lateral walls, engraved with signs of the Thark runic alphabet, were seen inscriptions and signs. There are no doubts that it is about a Germanic language. However, commented Leto, this path has the aspect of the construction of the White Atlanteans. Look these stones. The manner in which they are carved. They are authentic menhirs, that only they could have planted. The observation of Leto was promptly confirmed by the Amautas. when they came to these lands, many centuries ago, that path was already there. But only the initiates could cross through it, and for this reason it was called the Path of the Gods. The white invaders could never find it, although surely they would utilize the two parallel carriageway that the Incas constructed imitating the Path of the Gods. But they, the two Amaltas of the Black Bonnet, should not talk about these matters with the Wanks due to, such mission was reserved to the Atamarunas, who were waiting for them at the end of the journey. The capital, Cusco, was located in the center of the four regions in which the Inca Empire was divided. In the west, the Contisao. In the east the Antisao. And in the south, towards the Path of the Gods was oriented, the Calisao. The two real paths found by the conquerors of Pizarro were from north to south, following a parallel way to the Path of the Gods. The coastal route began in Tumbes, and it reached Talca, in Chile, 4.000 kilometers later. The central, 1,000 kilometers more extensive, started from Quito, and ended in the Lake Titicaca. But, the difference was that the real paths were roads where the whole activity of the empire was canalized. The Path of the Gods, on the contrary, was a secret way, only new and employed by the Amaltas of the Black Bonnet, the feared initiates of the Cold Death Atikanoi. The Path of the Gods showed a perfect state of conservation, competing in certain places of exceptional beauty, with the best European routes. That was obtained by the permanent distribution of cement through it, who were in charge of the carriageway's maintenance, of the casca service, and the sustenance of the tambos, that existed every 3 or 4 leagues. Accordingly, after walking a bit through the Cyclopean stone path, the travelers found a tambo of huge dimensions. According to what the lords of Tharsis knew later, those huge tambos were edified in the surroundings of the lateral exits and secrets of the Path of the Gods. The place was attended by mbes of the same swarthy race that served to the Amaltas. Some children ran to discharge the llamas that they brought, and guided them to a corral, but they demonstrated great fear for the Spaniard horses, which had to be attended by the Catalans. There, they ate the unmissable corn tortilla, tamales, the hot arpi, and they rested the half of the day. Akasca, in the meantime, went on the run to advance the news about the arrival of the lords of Tharsis. Even for the exhausting days, during which they marched all the day, and just stopped in the nights in the nearer tambos, time passed and the Path of the Gods seemed to have no end. And week after week, the cold, the wind, and the snow were pushing them continuously, due to the path strangely descended under the 3,000 meters, obeying them to be permanently snug. A motive of joy was constituted by the fast recovery of Guillermo de Tharsis. Only 2 days after the healing of the fever, it stopped notably, and the inflammation of the leg began to disappear. After 15 days he could walk almost normally. But, 70 days later, they were still transiting the same straight carriageway, which accidents, repeated 1,000 times, echelons, ramps, tunnels, and suspension bridges, were now boring and monotonous for them. The presence of the runic inscriptions, in the same Germanic language, was constant during the thousands of kilometers traveled, although it tended to increase in variety and perfection in the measure that they were drawing nigh to their destiny. But, such legends and signals were evidently posterior to the megalithic constructions that were found disseminated throughout the Path of the Gods. Such stones exhibited the ancient and distinctive sign of the rooms of Neptune, from which the rooms just reflected a superficial symbolism. 1 week before they reached to the Lake Titicaca, they arrived to a tambo, where 8 Amaltas of the Black Bonnet and a strange personage were waiting for them. He was an old man of grey hair, and factions of Nordic European, whose blue eyes and clear skin confirmed that he belonged to the white race. As the 2 first Amaltas that the lords of Tharsis met, the white old man and his companions only wanted to see the stone of Venus. Leto of Tharsis, who interpreted correctly his desires, acceded patiently to it, unsheathing the wise sword, and removing the ribbon from the hilt. An exclamation of astonishment and acceptance emerged from the 9 throats. and only then they expressed intentions in the men of stone. All have unmounted, and were placed behind Leto of Tharsis, admired at the same time for the reaction of their amphitryons. The old man, speaking the same Germanic dialect of the Amautus, but in much clearer manner, asked, "And the princess? Have you brought the princess?" Such interrogation disconcerted Leto, who turned back to cross a gaze with his relatives. Thus, he discovered the eyes of Valente of Tharsis, unrecognizable as the lady, behind the Dominican tunic, and suddenly he understood everything. Hitting his brow with the palm of his hand, he said smiling, "Surely you're referring to my cousin Valente. But, you're right, noble old man. She's a princess of Tharsis." Thereupon, he removed the hood from leaving uncovered the countenance of the lady. When the old man saw her, and the 10 Amautus, they smiled, hitting their brows with the palm of the hand too, imitating the gesture of Leto of Tharsis. The old man was one of the Atomirunas, to whom the words in Kotwak, pronounced by Leto of Tharsis, had invoked. But, who were the Atomirunas? According to what the old man said, who, after a narrated reception, turned as sparing and laconic as the Amautus, the Atomirunas belonged to a family. They were members of the house Inga Coleman. Inga, which meant offspring. That is to say, that the Atomirunas were the offspring of Coleman. That was comprehensible, explained Leto, to the men of stone, due to the particle in meant offspring in the Germanic languages, as in Revingen or Carolingian. But, who was Coleman? The old man refused to respond, alleging that his relatives would explain it. In Coati, the Isle of the Moon. Where was located the Isle of the Moon? In the late Titicaca, where they would arrive after a week of march. The lateral path, that guides to from the path of the gods to Cusco, since days ago that they have left it behind. Now, they were in a region not explored yet by Spaniards. But, they had to hurry, because the Ingas had news that an expedition to the south was being prepared. The White Wangsaquile reached at last moment, when the Atomirunas were desperated to fulfill the admonition of the gods. And nothing else was possible to wrest from the Atomiruna old man. 7 days later, they distinguished a colossal fortress of stone in what was the extreme south of the path of the gods. The path, in fact, entered in front of the fortress, and this, which walls had the form of a half-moon, was cropped a mountain of unprecedented height. Nevertheless, the path was not totally disrupted. A secret exit, only adequate for the Hyperborean initiates, permitted to cross through the obstacle. There, they spent the night, and were persuaded by the old men to leave the equipment and the animals there, due to they could not transport it to the island. The next day they passed through the secret exit, previous libation of the mysterious potion, by the 4 Cat Islands and 50 warriors that were accompanying them now. The lords of Tharsis, instead, had just to situate themselves before the stone, and listen to the runes of Neptune, in the language of the birds. They indicated them what strategic movements they should make to approximate correctly to the secret exit, and surpass the veil of the illusion. From the other side of the mountain, they found it just 5 leagues from the shore of the lake, towards the port of Carrickbuck. It was June of 1535. Embark in the pirogue Tetera constituted an original experience for the Spaniards, although the distrustful Catalans feared to sink in any moment. However, 6 hours later, they reached without problems in the Isle of the Moon. They fell over small seashore, of no more than 10 feet of kestel width, surrounded by a prominent ravine of 200 rods high. A narrow and visible path in zigzag allowed ascent until the summit of the cliff, from where the habitable surface of the isle was extended. According to the explanations of the Amautus, over the Isle Coati existed a fortified hamlet and a temple. But they were not going to the surface. When all descended to the beach, the Atomiruna revealed that they would have to cross another secret entrance, which was right there, on the wall of the ravine. Once again, the men of stone localized the runes, and the Catalans had to be drugged. Beyond the illusion of the ravine, there was a dim tunnel, coated entirely of stone blocks, which declined in ramp, and disappeared in the bowels of the aisle. For the next 20 minutes, they continued descending, until the tunnel had stabilized, and guided them to the threshold of a door guarded by two Amaltas of the Black Bonnet. When they saw the newcomers, one of them hit the enormous silver gong, with a mace that he had in his hands. An unusual spectacle was suddenly offered before the disconcerted glance of the Spaniards. Thus, they understood that they were in front of a cavern of titanic dimensions, so huge that an entire population existed there. And the sound of the gong had warned to all the residents, who, now, were going out massively from their homes to watch them with curiosity. Almost everyone noticed the Lord of Tharsis belonged to the same mestizo race of the Amaltas. The exit of the tunnel guided to an elevated corridor from where a great part of the cavern was dominated, which was not better illuminated than the precedent corridor. Under its feet were hundreds of humble houses, made of stone, separated by streets and squares, being distinguished some bigger buildings, that were surely palaces and temples. The Itamaruna made indications to follow him, and he took the corridor, whence some carved stairs started in the rock to descend towards the village. The corridor had an open bend that situated them before a building which, perhaps, was the major of the city. A white stair, flanked by two tigers of stone, permitted to reach there. In the door a group of men with different ages were waiting for them, but with similar clothing and race of the Itamaruna. All demonstrated intense joy for the presence of the Lords of Tharsis, and some of them, incapable to contain themselves, approached, and clasped their forearm, in some kind of Roman salute. There, the Amaltas of the Black Bonnet retired, and the Itamurunas made them pass to the palace, to a semicircular hall, with stands which gave all the impression of being an amphitheatre, or forum. The men of stone had to accommodate around a central table with form of a half-moon, while a dozen of Itamurunas was distributed on the stairs. An old Itamaruna, to whom they called Tatanga, who was much elder than who had guided there, took the word, and spoke to the Lords of Tharsis. "I know that one of you understand our sacred language. That flatters me enormously. We, instead, do not know yours, and you must forgive us for it. However, we know whence you come, from the same world of our ancestors, more than 700 years ago." Leto of Tharsis assented with a gesture, and Tatanga continued. "Now, White Wanks and Quillies, will you do us the grace to show the stone of the green star?" Leto extracted the wise sword from his scabbard, and, removing the ribbon, exposed the stone of Venus for the contemplation of the Itamurunas. A murmur of approval accompanied the exhibition, but Tatanga approached to examine it closer. He turned back, and made a signal to some beauty women initiates, who guarded the door. They came out, and returned immediately, bringing a squared base whereon rested an object, which could not be seen for being covered by a white cloth with black swastikas. The women initiates deposited its content, with great delicacy, over the half-moon-shaped table, and they returned to their places. The old Itamaruna removed then the cloth, and the men of stone could observe, height of the amazement, a Germanic crown of iron, in which a stone of Venus exactly equal to the wise sword was crimped. "This is the crown of King Coleman," affirmed Tatanga, with respectful voice.